Today's video is about how I taught my son comprehension in less than 5 minutes. Well, I don't know whether there are any other parents out there who had the experience that I had, that when my son was about 7, he used to get bits and pieces of homework, and we would repeatedly sit in front of comprehension homework and he would read through a passage, and I'd be making tea or something, and he'd read through a passage, and then he'd read the first question, and he'd say to me, Mum, so what's the answer to this question? And I'd say, very calmly at first, I'd say, well, it's in the passage you've just read. And of course, when they're 7, they're not very difficult passages, and it's quite clear the answer to every question. Well, to the parent, it's clear. So this used to happen once a week at least, and so he would say, but I can't see it, and I would eventually sort of point out the vague area of where the question was, and I'd say, read the passage again. Here's the question, read the passage again, what does the question mean? And we would go through all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm absolutely sure, if what my friends have said to me, there must be thousands of parents out there who have the same experience. And I sort of, this went on, and then we left the school at the end of that year when he was 7. And it was only when his teacher on the very last day of school said to me, by the way, I just want you to know as you're leaving, he has a serious comprehension problem. At which point, I'm not very often speechless, as you probably can work out by now, and I was completely speechless at that. I was just, I couldn't believe that this woman was telling me that he had a serious comprehension problem, totally out of the blue, really. Because I just imagined that was perfectly normal. Everybody would do that during their homework. And we'd all be having the same battles, because frankly, quite a lot of my friends were. Anyway, so I thought, well, I need to do something about it. And I thought about all the work that I do with my adult clients and my professional work, and I thought, well, there's got to be something that's really simple that I can do with him, with Thomas, that will help him with his comprehension. And indeed, there was. To the extent that when we arrived at the next school, his comprehension problems had totally disappeared. I didn't even mention it to the teacher because I thought, well, I'll just see how things go. And when she hadn't said anything by the end of the first term, I tentatively asked her, I said, well, his last school said that he had serious comprehension issues. And she looked at me in a puzzled way and said, oh, no, not that I've noticed. And it wasn't as easy for me to keep tabs because all of a sudden the new school didn't have any homework, so there was nothing coming home. Anyway, of course, I was delighted. I thought, my goodness, that worked. I can't believe it. Absolutely brilliant. And so simple. And then time went on, and then something happened which was really set him back. And he came home at the end of that year, so he was 8 by then. He came home at the end, having had some tests, and he got into the car in a very glum way. And I said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, we had some tests today, and he said, I scored nothing on my comprehension test. So I said, oh, okay, let's see if we can work out what happened. Well, and here was the thing. He used not to be able to do comprehension. He then could do comprehension. Now all of a sudden he couldn't again. So I thought, well, what on earth happened? What happened there? What was his issue? What happened there that meant he didn't have an issue anymore? And what has happened now that means that he's completely gone back? And I spoke to his new teacher, who was just as puzzled as I was, and said, no, he's had absolutely no problems. She said, I absolutely was completely astounded that he scored nothing. I don't know what happened. Well, here's what happened. What I discovered was something which is so simple that you can teach your children, that meant that in one sentence I had helped him overcome his comprehension problems, and he then did something which meant in that moment he made a choice not to understand. So what happened when he left the first school was that when we sat down and we thought about it, I said to him, you know what, when you're reading something, I said, by the way, when you're reading something, you need to be making pictures of what's going on in your head so that you understand it. Well, he looked at me and he went, gosh, okay, cool. And that was that. That was truly it. So you can imagine how surprised I was that that sentence had meant that all of a sudden he was fine with his comprehension. And then not fine in the test. So when I asked him again about the test, I said, well, what was different about the test that meant that you didn't understand it and couldn't answer the questions? And he said to me, well, you know you taught me to do comprehension, Mummy. And I said, well, I did. And because I didn't really consider that saying one sentence of you need to make pictures in your head to understand it was, you know, would be labelled you taught me how to do comprehension. So he said, well, you know you taught me how to do it. Well, he said, I like to put lots of detail in my pictures. So I like scenery and I like to imagine what people look like, and I need to take my time over what I'm imagining is going on in the story. Well, you can see what this is leading to, can't you? He said, so I decided not to make pictures because I knew I wouldn't have time. Well, of course, really when you know the answer, that, you know, that's funny. If you don't know that the process of comprehending something is being able to imagine it happening, which frankly, none of us really know that until we know it, as it were, like so many things in life. And the teacher didn't know that. So when I went in and I said, this is what I've discovered, she looked at me in amazement and she said, I honestly would never have got to that with him. I would have been putting all sorts of test strategies in place. And she was amazed at how simple things can be in terms of children's problems if you just know how to ask. And I'll do some stuff about how to ask questions in the next video anyway. But here's the takeaway from today, is that if you are like Thomas, if your child is like Thomas, and where so many boys are, particularly boys seem to be, where, you know, for them it's quite hard work reading. In fact, I mean, on Thomas's 11th birthday, it was very funny. We took a few of them out to the cinema and to a restaurant. And there we all were, sitting there having our supper together, and the three boys, all of whom were 11, were having this very funny conversation, which I wished I'd been able to tape, which when, you know, they were trying to be cool, you know, at 11, but also their conversation was so funny, in that they were all going, oh yeah, reading's, don't really like reading, it's really hard work, isn't it? Because, you know, you've got to read the words and make pictures of it, and you've got to understand it, and you've got to follow it, and oh yeah, it's much better when Mum reads to me. Yeah, much better, because then I don't have to do all that work. Well, you know, how many of us, I know I do this, I read a novel and I get to the end of a page and I think, oh my God, I wasn't concentrating. What on earth happened? And what happened was that my mind had wandered off. And so your mind needs to be working on imagining what's going on the page. But nobody teaches our children that. Nobody says those words. Make pictures of what is happening. because it's so automatic. It happens automatically to us all. And it will happen eventually to our children. And for some children it doesn't happen. But here's the thing, why wait? Why not tell them now and save the angst and, you know, in extreme cases, of being sent for dyslexic testing because they don't understand what's written on the page? There are some children who really find it hard to make the connection between the word and the meaning. Well, and the missing piece is what's in their imagination to make it come alive. So just make that suggestion to them, and good luck.